Hello, on the table today we've got a mixture of little bits and pieces, and it really is about soldering today. We have the table a bit cluttered at present because we need to explain a few things. These little boards are small power units that you can plug into this sort of breadboards, and you can supply yourself with either 5 volts or 3.3 volts. And they've got a nice little jack here that you can plug a sort of external supply into, and it's between 7 and 12 volts. Now I had an adapter, 12 volt adapter, which I plugged into there. All worked quite well until I managed to short out the supply. Only very briefly, but I managed it, and it blew this one up. So I plugged the other one in, did exactly the same, all within a space of 10 minutes. What's even worse is that they blow short circuit, that the 12 volts goes through a little, let me point it out to you, goes through a little diode on this board, straight through the voltage regulator, out on the power rail. So instead of having 5 volts on the power rail, I have put 12 volts on the power rail. So not a very happy bunny. Move that out of the way. I consider these things to be junk, but what can I learn from these things? Well, I can repair them for a start because I've blown them up. It's replacing these little voltage regulators. We can do that for a start, and really we're going to learn a little bit about soldering, because I don't get that much of a chance to do any of this sort of thing. Now, I've got some old solder that's been laying around for yonks. You can see that it's oxidised on the outside of it. This one is all oxidised and not used. Probably ideal for this sort of job. But honestly, if you're using solder on a day-to-day basis, it'll be a lot cleaner than this stuff. I have a little bit of flux. Use any old flux. Don't use plumber's flux. Whatever you do, you'll end up with corrosion all over the place. This is homemade flux. It's 1 part rosin, 4 parts isopropanol. You can use anything you like, really, any solvent. Over here we've got meths. You can use meths, methylated spirits, or denatured alcohol, some people call it. So rosin and isopropanol. There are plenty of commercial fluxes out there for this sort of work. Right, but I prefer my homemade stuff. Now, I've also got a collection of tweezers, hooks. They're all over the place. They're just junk ones I picked up from here, there and everywhere. Nothing special, nothing's been bought special. Except these sort of ceramic tip ones, which I bought for some other reason, I don't know, which I'll not go into. I've got a piece of wire which I stripped out of a piece of mains cabling, and that's going to play an important role in what we're going to do to get these devices out. Now, I've already had a go at this one. I'll put that this one side, and we're now going to sort of switch on our soldering on. I forgot to mention one, I think a prime requirement these days of any soldering is to have a temperature controlled soldering iron. I think you're going to be at a bit of a loss without one doing this type of work and end up doing more damage. Now, it moves around all over the place. So one of the things we could do is anchor it down, and that's what I've got, these sort of 4 set things here, whatever they're called. Some form of weird medical appliance. And as you can see, it sort of stops the board from moving around. It'd be nice if I had a clamp, but I haven't got a clamp, you know, sort of a little vice or something to hold these boards in, and until I find something that really grabs my attention, I'm not going to waste any money. I'm just going to sort of do things, improvise, and I'm finding a nice heavy pair of pliers, or not pliers, what do you call them? Adjustable wrench. It works nicely. It's sort of gripping hold of the USB port, and it's nicely anchored to the table, and it works quite well. So that's anchored down. So that'll solve one of your major issues of it running around all over the place. Let's zoom in a bit. We could use our cutters and snip all those contacts and then just desolder it from the other side, desolder it from there. But that does put strain on the PCB, so the copper tracking could be pulled away from the substrate if you did something like that, and not sort of a recommended method, not one that I would recommend. This piece of wire needs to be sort of put a little bend in it about the length of the thing I want to get out. I'll bend it so that I can, yeah, that gives me sort of access I want. Right, I'm just setting my temperature of my soldering iron. Got it up to sort of about 230. This is because we've got lead-free solder on these boards, and lead-free solder melts at 220, so I've got my iron set for about 230. I'll just dip this in, prep it up with a little bit of grotty solder. Yeah. Now you might see why anchoring something down is important. I'm chasing it around all over the place. Right, okay, there we go. Right. If you haven't got your anchor down, now it's taken rather a lot of heat to get that done. The next step is I'm going to put some blobs of solder on the device, and I'd like to put some more flux on. Now before I do so, I better ask the boss if it's okay that I ruin a paintbrush. This little paintbrush you left on the table, is it?
It's one that I rescued from Dawn.
Oh, is it any good?
I don't know, because I haven't used it.
Do you want to use it?
No.
Okay, thank you.
It would have gone to charity, but I rescued it.
Oh, okay. Right, there we go. Put some flux on what we're doing. Flux helps to carry away a lot of the impurities as we're working, and there's a lot of impurity on this on this solder. So try and do it without burning any of the other components. It's tight in here. Get a bit blob on the back. Why am I putting a blob on the back of this one? Hopefully it all will be revealed. And let's see if I can get in here without... Ah, good. Put some solder on all three. And I put a big fat bridge across all three terminals. Now I'm going to whack the heat on my soldering iron. I'm going up to about 240, which is... I like to keep my temperature on my soldering iron reasonable. The reason behind that is that PCB tracks on the substrate start to lose their adhesion once you start creeping up with temperature. So once you start passing to about 250 degrees, you're in, you know, the danger area. You know, you can do a lot of damage. Right, let's bridge this. Oh, okay, I think that's on there. And I'll snip it off. I'll take that. Take mine up to about 250. I think I'm going to need the heat today. I want to get a bit more solder on there. Might seem a bit like butchery, but there we go. Let's see. Grab a pair of tweezers, don't know which ones. And I'm going to heat this side until it's all molten and crisp. And, there we go. That's what I was hoping would happen. Sadly, we got a little bit of didn't work as neat as it could have done. Let's take the tweezers, take that off. We've got a little bit of a bridge across on that device there. And this is where our solder wick comes in useful. Oh, these are called crossover tweezers, and they sort of pinching closed all the time. So I dip it in my flux, and hopefully I'm going to reduce the heat on my soldering iron now back down to something reasonable. 220, that'll do. And suck up the solder that was on that pad. Turn it round. Hopefully, see if we can get in there. Suck that up. Right, now I think it could do with a little bit more cleaning that up, because I like to get it almost sort of back to flat track. And unlike a lot of other people that you'll see, they want to sort of have a bobble of solder there. Personally, I find that a pain. Go back on. I'm just sorry, I'm away from the camera a bit. Now, back again. This is the brush I use. A lot of people just use a toothbrush and seem to get away with it. I believe that toothbrushes which are made out of nylon could possibly give you an electrostatic problem, although in practice it doesn't. I've got a little bit of methylated spirits here. I'm going to use that to sort of clean up my board. Why? Because my isopropanol is living elsewhere. I think it's living elsewhere. Probably at home. And there we go. It's all nicely cleaned up and ready for the placement of the component. These little pads, there's no need to tin them anymore. They've got a film of tin over, a solder over them, and I don't like to have, as I said earlier, I don't like putting a bottle of solder over it. It just makes it more difficult to place the component. Alright, okay. From here on, it's a bit repetitive. Getting the components off and putting them back on. I'm putting the cap back on my methylated spirits because I don't want any fires here. So warning to any of you youngsters out there, if there's anybody listening, I burnt myself with this stuff when I was 4 years old. And it hurt. and put a bit of flux on the device. This one's a bit more tricky because we got this electrolytic capacitor in the way. Don't be off of taking out, if you find that access to a component is sort of extremely difficult, don't be frightened of removing that component. I mean, if that was in the way, I would remove that. If this is in the way, I'll remove that. If I think it's in the way. Maybe in the way, I don't know. So let's put some blobs of solder on. The idea of putting the blobs of solder on is so that to sort of form an amalgam with the lead-free solder, because this is leaded, does contain lead, and it lowers the temperature at which it melts. Everybody tells you that, and it does. But also as a sort of a heat reservoir in the removal process. So when I see the solder molten, it's time to sort of lift. Let's get that up. Nice blob of solder. Let's solder this one in place. And honestly, the guys who are sort of masters at this stuff with their hot air guns, I mean, they love showboating all the time, and you try it and it all yeah, they only get the skills like that because they do a lot of it. Us mortals, you know, well, we're not blinking good at it at all. So if you're doing it for a profession, you can get away with it. Plus, it's somebody else's piece of kit, and they're not really bothered, are they? If they mess it up, they wouldn't show it to you in any case. Let's get that off. Get myself handy with a pair of tweezers. Make sure I can grab everything. And get the front one molten. There we go. Got the component off and left a bit of wire behind, but that's not a problem. That's off. Take the bit off. Right. As I said, much the same for all of them. I hope you see the importance role that this is playing in holding this rigid. It makes life so much easier. Get a bit of solder wick. Clean the joints up. Now develop a system for yourself, the one that works. And although this is long-winded, what I don't do it all that often, but when I do it, I don't want to have to sort of relearn skills. And this saves a lot. And I can't complain about that. Okay. And let's go for a clean up again. Now, so a silly long-winded method like this works virtually every time. And go for any shortcuts, they tend to be costly, or can be in the long run. Let's clean that up. There we go. That's all ready for its new component. Wish I had tissue or something. Oh dear. Oh, this is embarrassing. I have to use crumpled up old tissue out of my pocket. Well, I hope you get that. Let's zoom in a bit and see what it looks like. All ready for putting the components in. We want it sitting flat. We don't want it tilted to the camera like that. Component will just slide off and fall that way. We don't want it slipping backwards or anything. We want it flat. It's going to make life a lot easier for soldering. And we'll see what we can do. I absolutely love it when it goes wrong, because this is what it's about. It's about learning. And there I've lifted a pad. Yeah, damaged it so much that there's a connection goes from the pad to the end of that component. There's another little connection that goes sideways, another little connection I think that goes upwards. Fortunately they're all earth, because I tested it out on the other one, and I could sort of bridge it all out if I wanted to, but honestly it's not worth repairing. But here is another important point. I've clouted this with my soldering iron, and it's, as you can see, damaged the link. And the important point I'd like to stress here is you should remove all the plastic bits. Anything you can remove it before you start doing down there. Not only does it give you better access to the components, it stops you from damaging components like I've damaged this. What happened was that I was running my soldering iron quite hot when I removed this device, and obviously, I say quite hot, I was up at about 240, which is high for me. I paid the penalty, and as I said before, the hotter you run your soldering iron, the more likely you are to damage your PCB tracks. Now, before I start positioning everything, you'll notice that this reel of solder is here. Well, it's here for a purpose. When I come to solder in the component, I can rest my hand on here, solder as appropriate, you know, get in to solder the component in place. A nice little steady rest for your hand. Better than sort of trying to, with your hand all fumbling around in distance. Nice solid base, and do that. Just to sort of steady things up. I'm using a much finer solder wire to do my soldering with, and hopefully all goes well. And I may have to do this left-handed, I don't know, to give you the best camera view. On the other board, the chip that I lifted the pad on, it's the only second time I've only ever tried this method. So there is a learning curve. Now, one of the things you've got to remember is that I'm doing all this with nothing more than a sort of a magnifying headset, and really we are getting to a point whereby one needs to think about microscopes. Well, at this stage I'm just thinking about microscopes. I don't really have the cash around to buy one, and I don't have the amount of work. Oh, that's nice and clean. I don't have the amount of work to do that would justify buying one. There we go, that one's repaired. Now I'm not going to bother with the other one. Not unless I really have to. And I don't have to. I don't even like them. But that's hopefully a little demonstration of, to you, a bit of practice for me, which I'm pleased to have had. And I'm also very pleased that we had the problem with the pad lifting on this one. During the desoldering process, the solder wick got stuck to the board. I wiggled to free it, and in doing so pulled the pad off. I was using one of these pointed tips at the time, and I don't like them. They don't make proper contact with the solder wick, and therefore don't transfer enough heat into the solder wick to keep it free of the board. I should have been using something that had a flat side to it, like this one. And if you ever get your tape stuck to the board, I would recommend that you first apply a bit more solder to it, like so. Come back, warm it up again and remove. At least that way you won't pull the pad off of the board. Now before I finally put this to bed, I'm just going to clean the pad up.